I don't know who wants to start, but I like the question that we've posed in the description, which is this idea of I'm going to sort of take the second part of it first, but the challenges and implications of adapting a story that inhabits a different point of view. And as part of that question, I think I also want to know sort of how you think about what it means to inhabit a different point of view, or whether that different point of view is something that feels very organic for you as a creator, as a writer, whether that's a writer, a producer, or a director. So maybe we can start with this idea of inhabiting a different point of view as you enter into an exploration of a story you're going to explore. In the case of each of you, I don't know where we want to start, but I think we can talk about each of your films. And Brady, we can talk about your previous film, Child of a Leader. I think that could also be a way into the discussion, but we can also talk about Vox Lux in terms of different point of view, unless you've been a rock star that I don't know about. But what is this idea of different point of view? How does that resonate with each of you on the panel? I'm looking at Eva and Brady.
Just to clarify, just out of curiosity, when you say different point of view, in what sense?
Well, the idea for us, I think, is also about filming abroad and sort of inhabiting a culture that may be different from your own.
So a cultural point of view.
I think we want to get to that, but I think we can also take a half step back from that, because I think it could be different points of view related to not just culture, it could be gender, it could be sort of a world outside of your own, or maybe a world that you've explored but you are trying to sort of explore more deeply. Right. If that makes sense.
Sure, that makes sense. I mean, of course, usually every story you tell, you're inhabiting a different point of view. So I think that, of course, there are stories which are closer to your life experience than others. I mean, so far, I've never made anything that was very close to my life experience. Yeah. But yeah, I think that it's every film comes with its own set of problems and complications and things that these sort of obstacles that you set up for yourself that you hope to overcome. Mm-hmm. I mean, because when you're in the process of conceiving something, you go, that's going to be almost impossible. Let's try and do it. And I think that shooting in a place that you're not that familiar with, or in a language that you do not speak, is one of those great obstacles. Like, oh my God, can we find a child actor that can pull this role off? Or like, oh my God, am I going to be able to convince somebody to give me $10 million? It's the same kind of thing. And I shot my first film in Hungary, and my last film I shot here in New York, and I found it much easier to work somewhere else than I did at home, for a variety of reasons. But I mean, we can talk about that later. But sure. But it ended up being less of an obstacle and actually something more inspiring in a way, because you're walking around seeing everything for the first time, and you have a sort of child's view of the place.
My guess is that for many artists, the idea of finding something that might seem to an audience or from a description to be very different from your own experience probably still has aspects of it that resonate with your own experience, because you're probably bringing your own, you're putting your own imprint on it, you're bringing your own experience to those characters that might seem foreign, but actually probably have a strong connection to you. I wonder that in the case of your film.
That's a good point in my film. For those who don't know the story, it's very briefly the story of a battalion of women, Kurdish women who get captured by ISIS, become sex slaves, and escape and become fighters. So obviously I have no experience in fighting or sex slavery personally. I have no experience in Kurdish or the Kurdish culture. However, what I do have is, and that, I guess that's what you do as a filmmaker. You're like, how can I relate to that? And how can my own experience make the audience relate to the movie? I'm a woman, obviously. And I'm bicultural. I'm half Spanish. My grandfather was himself a soldier during the Spanish Republic. And I was brought up with stories of fighting for an idealism and for democracy. And all of this made that I felt at home with the story. And I just very humbly went to Kurdistan and went to see the women and collected their words and their testimonies and tried to be as faithful as I could all along the way, trusting my instincts as a filmmaker, as a woman, and as myself, Eva Husson. I had consultants all over the process, because on top of it, I'm I guess I'm an activist in a way, and I was extremely aware of the post-colonial issues about, telling a story of a culture that was not mine, and where I could have sort of impressed some Western, projections onto. And I had consultants all the time to, flag me where that could pop up, and so that I made sure, the best I could, obviously, that it didn't happen.
Eva, were you surprised about the places where, or maybe share with us your response to the places where you felt a connection to the women whose lives you were exploring, whose stories you were exploring, and also the places where you completely found a complete difference between you and the people that you were working with?
The first similarity, I guess, was when I encountered the story of these women. I had been aware of the story of Yazidi women who had been enslaved. And I, as a person reading the newspaper, I always felt the need to just put that at a distance, because it was so hard. And the first time I came across the story that not only had they been enslaved, they had, stood up and become fighters. As a woman, I was like, fuck, those stories are never told. Women are always mostly shown as victims in those occasions, and they don't accept that condition, and they stand up for themselves. And I want to convey that, because it moved me. And if it moved me in like a paragraph, how powerful can it be to do that in a fiction where I can really go in depth and show the whole emotional journey of these women? So that was the main bond that I have with the story, and that always kept me focused on what I needed to do. In terms of the differences, I guess I learned a lot. For example, Kurdish society is a high-intensity society. It's really based on the importance of the collective, which is the opposite of Western society, where the individual, is the important person in the equation. And that makes a whole world of a difference in terms of reactions and how people react and what's important in terms of scale of values. And always, kept that in mind, like, she's not a Westerner, the collective is always more important, honor is always more important. It's not about you, it's not about getting out of it yourself, it's about the us. And that was very, it was very interesting for me to learn from that as well, as an individual.
I'm going to go to Laure, and then I'll go to Jean-Stéphane. I'm thinking, Laure, about, I guess I'm thinking about how in your film, in the Mustang specifically, I guess I should say, and asking you about sort of, you're inhabiting and exploring a world that might be considered foreign, and it's the American West. It's a very male environment, and yet I find that you're bringing a lot of kind of a unique sensitivity to your approach to explore this, what might be considered from on the page a very macho kind of environment. I wonder how you were drawn to that, and I appreciate that sensitivity that you bring to a world that could have been looked at very differently.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, for the Mustang, it's about a convict who's dealing with strong anger issue, and I am not American. I'm not a man. I've never been in prison. I am not violent. I don't think so. But I definitely relate to this character in a very, very deep, personal way, and I feel that I always got very scared of entrapment. It's kind of my repetitive obsession of, trying to just be I'm scared of imprisonment. I'm scared of being a little bit like claustrophobic. Anyway, so I felt that there's something very personal that I needed to tell through this story. And then exploring the West and anchoring the film in this prison in Nevada, and playing with all those codes of Western and prison film. This is where I kind of did a lot of research and met a lot of inmates. And what I felt being a woman in that world, where I think I got very advantaged in a way, is that they would open themselves much more to me, I feel. That if I was a man, there's something about all the secret and all those stories that they would share, and that deepened so much the character and the story, that I felt that the lack of judgment, and also because they didn't really used to open themselves so much to a woman. There is something like, I was the only woman, so I was really like just being surrounded. I think they liked being vulnerable with me. I think they like it. Sometimes they would say, I feel like I'm a little kid again. There's something very deep in their sensibility that they would share, and that makes actually this film very tender.
And conversely, were there areas that you had to overcome, or were there aspects of that relationship that you had to overcome with these guys in sort of getting to that vulnerable place? Or maybe you can share with us any hurdles that you found in sort of being let in, or building that trust so that they could let their guard down and share in this experience with you. It
took years. It took years of research, going a lot in this prison in Nevada and in San Quentin in California. It was a huge work in process, and it was not in 1 or 2 times, it was in 10 times. And I finally got 3 of them to be in the film, and they actually, when they came on board, the trust, they had a full of trust, and I could feel that they were completely open to dive into their characters, but that was built like for 5 years.
And there's this parallel story in your film of these guys who are in prison, who are struggling with being there, or maybe getting out of prison, paralleled with these wild horses, these Mustangs who they are developing a relationship with. I don't mean it as a joke, but what about the challenges of navigating the animals in the film? Because there's just as much of a parallel story of these guys being broken as there is with these horses being broken. It's such a core aspect of the film.
Yes, there's definitely a strong identification. Do you mean like working with those animals?
Sure, yeah, just kind of developing that trust with them as well. I know they're trained animals, obviously, but for you.
But we wanted to have real Mustangs, and so we had like 3 similar horses for the main character. One very well trained, one semi-wild, and one completely wild and untouchable, that we used only for stunts. And we had real wild Mustangs, and then we had like very well-trained horses for scenes like during the storm. But they were very disciplined, much more than the men, I have to say. It was kind of like I was anticipating working with so much horses in 23 days. It felt completely impossible. But surprisingly, I didn't have to complain at all about horses, much more about the men.
Fair enough. Jean-Stéphane, I wanted to ask you about your first feature, and I wanted to ask about you were adapting a novel by a Congolese writer. Can you maybe give us a little bit of context about how you found that story, and kind of with this same line of questioning, what was it that kind of jumped out of the page for you that made you want to explore this story?
I mean, I realized when you asked the first question, that every film I did, I needed to connect with the film and with the character.
Yeah.
And your question made me realize that I always shot in different countries, but never in France. So my first short film was in an airport in Paris, in Roissy, so I was always on the way. The second short was in Colombia.
Yeah.
The third short film was in Mexico City.
Yeah.
Then I did my first feature documentary in Colombia, and then this film, Johnny Mad Dog, in Liberia.
Yeah.
And then I did a film for Arte in France, so nobody's perfect. I wanted to shoot the film here, but I had to shoot in Paris because it's Arte or whatever. And then I did this film in Thailand, and now I'm preparing this film in New York. So it's weird because I have the feeling I need to connect with the story every time, and all these characters can really relate to me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not a French guy, and it's not, you know, shooting in Paris. So I don't know. I have to think about it. But maybe there's something behind this. But
that's what I'm curious about. Without being sounding like a psychologist, when you
maybe you are, because now you know I'm fucked up with the question. With
no, because
10 years of.
But when you look at your work, what does it tell us about you, or about what intrigues you? I guess is what I really want to know.
The link with the films and stuff, it's always about childhood and violence, kind of, which relate to me. But so Johnny Mad Dog was about child soldiers in Liberia. And the short films and stuff were about kids also in different countries. And I feel the same kind of connection with some child soldiers in Liberia, even if it's a different culture. So it's sometimes also, it's films for me, it's a way to express something from yourself, but you feel you can be shy at the beginning to say, okay, it's your own story, or your own feeling, you want to portray, you know, on film, so you try to find some mask, maybe, to tell your story in different ways. So the Child Soldiers was a way for me to tell my own story on my own childhood in a more fiction way. And it takes me like few films to say, okay, hiding behind characters, now I'm working on more something personal. But I think going like this in different countries is a way to express something, and maybe having a mask that nobody can see through. So a distance, I don't know if it's a distance, because I like also to immerse myself, with the fiction, And I like to immerse myself. I mean, I like to, I don't have family, you know, for example, and I like every film to be a story, a life story. So I spent 2 years in Liberia with these kids. I spent 2 years in Thailand with the prisoners. I mean, it's every time it changed my life, but that's why I like to make this business, maybe, this job, to experience some stuff, you know. And movie, it's a way to experience stuff. And instead of going to see a psychanalyst or whatever, like it's a therapy as well.
Well, okay. So I wonder to what extent your colleagues on the panel this resonates. What Jean-Stéphane is saying.
I completely relate to what I was saying. The distance, because sometimes it's very hard to talk about what obsesses you in a very direct manner. So you take a story that looks from the outside very far away from you, but you sort of, you know, like put little pebbles along the way that are yours, and that you really relate to that. And I realized that I needed to add something quite important about Girls of the Sun, the movie about the Kurdish soldiers, and it is that it's. I realized when I was doing the research that there hadn't been movies made about female soldiers. None. Like, you know, there were always the exception, or the one woman, you know, amongst men, which basically reinforced the notion that patriarchy ruled, and that's what it had to happen. And when I started working on that, I just realized the power of seeing women who just fended for themselves, supported by the Kurdish men around them. You know, this is not against men. This is hand in hand. And I believe so profoundly in the power of watching stories that shape your view of the world, and the new generations coming across these new stories. And I felt that I wished I had seen that when I was a younger filmmaker or a younger woman. And I really like the idea of introducing a different point of view on something that is classically completely masculine, which actually provoked some interesting reactions.
It absolutely did, and one of the things I was thinking about in relation to your film, Eva, which I saw at the Cannes Film Festival last year, was something that Jean-Stéphane said, this idea of immersiveness, or an immersive quality. Your film had the ability in my own case of watching it in May in the south of France, of transporting me to an entirely different world in such an immersive way. Of course, it's partially in the way that you shoot it, very up close, very much in the experience of what we're seeing on the screen. But I think about that in the context of each of the films represented and each of the filmmakers represented here, because I think there is, in addition to this ability to transport or to explore a different culture, a different world, different place, this ability to immerse your audience in something that they maybe never would have thought to explore, or a place they never would have thought to go.
I was joking earlier with Laure about when I saw Jean-Stéphane on the panel. I was like, I think I got invited to the wrong panel because Jean-Stéphane's going to talk about his experience in Thailand, Liberia, and I'll be like, well, you know, I was in the 13th district of Budapest. It's not that nice. You know, I think it's. Yeah, I mean, I've seen your previous movie, Sabengang, which I like very much, but I haven't seen your new film. But these are much more extreme scenarios, and Laure's also, I mean, working as a young French woman with I mean, a lot of the actors in your film are not actors, they're prisoners, right? I mean, that are part of the program. And so it's amazing for me to imagine you in Nevada working with these horses and these prisoners. You would have laughed so much. But yeah, my experience was more bleak than dangerous.
But even in Vox Lux shooting mostly in New York, transporting your audience to a place that maybe we might imagine in a certain way, the private life of a pop star, and seeing a much more dark and scary.
The only person that was scary was my financier. that was about it.
You survived that.
I lived to tell the tale, and you know, I mean, look, shooting in New York, or shooting in America, I would say in general, is extremely frustrating if you've shot anywhere else, for a variety of reasons. First of all, there's all of these fucking lawyers everywhere that are like, hey, you know, just so you know, like someone's always pointing at a watch or a contract or something that is going to totally fuck up your whole day. And actually, when you're shooting in Western, Central, Eastern Europe, it's actually quite supportive. It's like a cineast sort of community, and here, you know, you get treated like you're, you know, like a pedophile, like it's a nightmare. And so it's very there's so many rules and restrictions, and what was so strange is that my first film, the budget was $4 million, and I shot it in 25 days with real freedom, nobody harassing me. And then I come back home to America, where I live here in the city, and I was like, oh, it's going to be so great, you know, my daughter goes to school in New York, and it's going to be this really peaceful time. And the film had a much bigger budget, and somehow, you know, $12 million later, I had 3 days less of production time. You know, we shot the movie in 22 days, like, for no fucking reason. And I think that it was always because, like, you know, somebody billed you because, like, their car broke down for 3 hours on the side of a highway. In Hungary, they would be like, well, I'm sorry, like, do you have a brother or something that can show up on time? So I found the experience of working here. I felt like a foreigner here because I felt like I was constantly asking for things that were very simple, and suddenly there's some, you know, head of production who, in my case, was like a guy who had previously been the UPM of Expendables 3, and he was like, you know, look, I'm really sorry, but you can't have a slider. And I was like, a slider? I was like, you mean like a slider? Like, you mean like the 6-foot slider? Like, I can't have a slider? And he was like, well, what do you need it for? You have a dolly. And I was like, I don't know. I was like, you know, just in case we don't want to, like, set up a dolly track to, like, move the camera 3 or 4 inches. But the whole experience was like that. So the thing is that after working with European co-productions, I was so frustrated. I was like, oh my God, I just want to go back to America where things are simpler. And then I came back here, and it was a total nightmare. And so now I'm making my next movie in Central Europe again, even though it takes place in Philadelphia.
I also had like a nightmare experience with the unions. I had like listened to horrible stories about unions coming on your set and just like shutting everything down, and I was like, okay, but it also happened to the others. You know, you don't believe that one day will happen to you until it happens. So first day of shooting, everyone's so happy. I can feel like amazing positive energy. Second day of shooting, the unions are here at the door and asking to everyone to leave. The problem was like a huge production mistake. We should have never been non-union, but we were non-union, and it was a huge, huge mistake. And they put pressure on half of our crew, and then I could see everyone leaving in front of me, wrapping up and leaving. And I'm so sorry, but because they put pressure on, I mean, you can be blacklisted anyway. I completely understand like the pressure that they had on their shoulders. So everyone left. So I was kind of like, you know, trying to grab them. Please stay, please, 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 please. No, don't leave me, don't leave me. And for 2 days, we had to stop the shooting. So when you're waiting for 5 years to make your film, and the second day of shooting, everyone is shutting down, it's kind of like, you know, I was like, I want to go back home. But at the end, I mean, everything worked out. But yeah, we had to pay.
If I may chime in. It's not rosy outside either. I shot in the States, I shot in France, and I shot in Georgia. And I've had very tough experiences in the three places. In France, it's just, you know, whatever you ask, like, it's not possible. And, you know, it's a fucking nightmare to get anything done. And you're like, come on, you know, a little bit of enthusiasm there, you know. The French psyche is a little bit like, oh, we'll never make it, and blah, blah, blah. So that's one cultural thing. I shot in New York. Unions, fucking nightmare. You know, and I will probably try to avoid New York like the plague. And all my friends, filmmakers, just say that, you know, New York is the last place you want to shoot, basically.
Good luck, Jean-Stéphane. his movie, which starts very soon, is a New York movie. But
Georgia was actually, you know, quite flowery as well, if I may say so. I had a costume designer who's completely out of his league, like just completely lost. We did not have the main costumes for the movie literally 5 hours before starting the shoot. And it was a war movie, so, you know, it was all uniforms, had nothing. He was still dyeing them with tea bags in a kitchen until my producer just screamed at him. He was like, get this shit done now. So I don't know what happened. I was like, I'm going to decide this is going to resolve itself by tomorrow morning. And that's what you do, and suddenly, you know, they appeared. But then, you know, it was a war movie with weapons, and we were supposed to receive the support of the Georgian army. We filed the request 5 months prior, you know, just in time, tip top. 2 days before the shoot, we had nothing, not a single weapon for a war movie, you know. And same thing, I was like, I'm just gonna breathe, and it's gonna be fine. And they showed up, and then, you know, they showed up and some more, because we had like suddenly tanks and panzers. And I was like, okay, great. So it's I hear the thing about the union, but God, I just don't think there's any place where it's that easy. Really.
Yeah, my takeaway is that filming sucks everywhere, basically. It's a pain. What I want to do is, because we have so many filmmakers in the audience, I think we've laid a foundation with a number of different threads that we could explore, and for the last like 15 or 20 minutes really give any of the filmmakers or anyone in the audience a chance to sort of delve in more deeply into some of these specific topics, or we could go in a different direction as well.
It was mostly the decision of my production designer, who's a guy named Jean-Vincent Pouzos, who is real genius. I mean, of all the people I've ever worked with in my life, I learned the most from this man. It was because of the requirements of the season, the landscape. One big thing for us was the fact that we were shooting on celluloid, so there were 2 labs. There's actually still 2 labs in Budapest, so it made it cost effective that we didn't have to ship the neg around. And then the other thing is that there's an extraordinary tradition, cinematic tradition in Hungary. You know, Miklos Jancsó's son was my editor on the film. It was you're working with very, very good crews. I mean, really the best gaffers and Steadicam operators, etc. So for all of those reasons, Hungary. I mean, from my experience, I know people that have had tough times shooting there. I had a very positive one.
Thank you. When I went to Kurdistan, one of the things I was trying to do is to go back to the source of their story. Meaning, I didn't want to rely on what I had seen on documentaries or pictures, because I know these countries are very diverse. Iraq and Syria, you know, you have very desertic places and you have very green landscapes somewhere else. So when I went to northern Kurdistan, I realized that, you know, all the images I had were just, I had to throw out the window, because it was mountains and grass and, you know, sun, but it was cold. It was not this image we have of, for example, Iraq, where it's just dry in the desert. That's in the south, and that's literally another country. So when I was traveling throughout Georgia to make sure that the country was okay, I was hoping to find similar landscapes, and then I saw the main mountain that you see in the movie, and I saw this abandoned place. Georgia had suffered war 10 years prior with the Russians, so that made the crew very attuned to what we were doing, and really they pushed the extra mile to make things happen. So for example, that was a very tough logistical choice, because it was 5 hours outside the main city, and unlike Hungary, Georgia, you know, it's a place where everybody works 3 jobs, because you can't make a living as a filmmaker. So, you know, you paint buildings, and then you're a gaffer, and then, you know, you're a costume designer at the same time. So, you know, the fact that we had to displace everybody because there was no local crew meant a considerable amount of money had to go there, which, you know, sort of prevented us from getting other things. But I thought that it was the core of the aesthetic, you know, color of the movie. You know, those mountains and the fact that you can, even when you suffer through war, my take on war is that the people who fight for life. You know, they don't want to die, and they try to see life as much as they can. And when you have a landscape that is that intensely beautiful, it recharges you. And when I talk to the fighters, you know, I realized that, for example, you never fight a war like 12 hours a day. It's not a 12-hour a day job. It's you spend so much adrenaline that usually the fights are 2-3 hours long, and 5 hours when you have a very intense thing, and then everybody goes to eat and, you know, chat, and then, you know, at night you have nothing to do, so you go dancing, you know what I mean, like you dance around the fire. But and so all that became part of the landscape, like the emotional landscape and the actual landscape. Well, I was very, for example, you know, the Kurdish, like half Kurdish, half French. At the beginning, I was like, I'm making this movie because I feel it's right, but I can't expect anything, you know, in terms of distribution or worldwide rights. And at Cannes and Berlin, the Berlin before Cannes, we sold the world rights. So it's basically, it was bought all over the world. And I've been traveling since the beginning of September to countries, like I do like 2-3 countries per month. And that just gives you hope in terms of stick to what feels right for you. And maybe it won't happen, but at least you did it for the right reasons. And when it does happen, it feels even more right. But we all make movies with like such risks, you know. You can, I think this is a fundamental thing that I never tell you in film school. You should always feel completely centered about the story that you're doing, and you should always feel sure that you won't mind wasting 5 years of your life, because it really nurtures you, whatever happens with it. You can't make a movie with, you know, like dollar signs in your head as the end product. Yeah, you want an audience, but you can't know. Like, there's no guarantee. Like, this is not a guaranteed job. So if you go for the guarantee, you know, like, you know, working in a shop is a better outcome. But filmmaking is about taking risks. And believe me, the violence of the profession is insane. So you'd better just, you know, be okay with that.
But I also find the idea of an audience being like kind of an abstract notion, right? Like for me, I don't know what the difference is between $1 million and $1 billion, really. Like I can't, it's not a tangible, quantifiable thing for me, because I've never had $1 million, and I've certainly never had $1 billion. So when somebody tells me 10,000 people saw your movie, or 25,000 people saw your movie, I'm like, that sounds amazing. You know, that's a lot of people. And, you know, I mean, nowadays, I suppose because of social media and stuff, like we have maybe more of a sense of what the difference between 30,000, 40,000 and 1 million. But, I mean, who cares, right? Like, you want, like, good friends. Like, you don't want a lot of them. So I feel really like that the relationship is all about touching specific people, not everybody. I mean, I wouldn't know how to touch everybody. You know, it's impossible. And I think that it's very dangerous when you start from the inception of something thinking about how it's going to be received. Because, I mean, what a letdown if you spend several years, you know, really with your eye on the prize of 1 million viewers or 4 million viewers or whatever, or more. And then it doesn't work out, and if that's sort of what you base your self-worth on, it's like impossible. Especially nowadays where there's so much content, like there's so much stuff. Like I used to see everything, and part of the reason I don't see everything now is because I also, you know, I'm a father now, and I'm busy. But I still try to see everything, but it's impossible, yeah. Because there's too much stuff. There's too many people making things.
And we're proud of the problem.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the turnaround is so quick. Exactly, like totally. Like everything. The thing is, there's less and less money for cinema, especially. So now things that they used to give you, like, you know, 12 months to do. Like my movie went into pre-production in my last movie went into pre-production in this December of 2017, and then it was released in December of 2018. So like, which is really, really uncommonly fast. So there's a lot that everything's sped up, and I think we're all just trying to keep up with it.
I wonder, Jean-Stéphane and Laure, what you think of this question of audience, how that factors into your own decision making, or this notion of distribution. How do you relate to either what you're hearing or just see difference?
After you can explain, Laure, but I know where the question is coming from. It's really like, I think Fabien tried to find a different way to release film, and not just cinema or digital or whatever, but I have the feeling people now, they expect something different from cinema. And maybe we have a moment, as you said, there's a lot of stuff, too much stuff or whatever. So Fabien tried to find a way to release film in different ways. He is doing this program, which is Secret Cinema, so where you immerse really the audience, you know, into the film, instead of just, you know, for us releasing the film and see what's going to happen, you know, trying to find also different places where we can release films. That's more, no, that was more your question maybe, or what you're working on, Fabien, so.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I didn't understand that was the basis of the question. So, yes, like, but it's if you want if someone wants to help me with, you know, bring my work to more people, it still isn't self-promotion. I just want to give it to somebody who's good at it, right? Like, so it's sort of like if somebody has a new idea, brilliant. But after spending years making a movie, I don't feel like it's my job anymore to promote the fucking movie. I just don't feel that way. I'm like, I made it, and now somebody else can do what they want with it. And they usually make some really weird choices, but it's like, it's not my problem anymore. I'm like, oh, what a horrible font, but.
But you're saying it doesn't get you. You just kind of let it go.
I have to, because I'm in conflict with everybody for years, and then by the time you finally get it on the screen, and then people are like, I thought it was kind of mediocre, or I didn't like it, and you're like, well, fuck you, like, I'm doing my best, and so I think that in regards to the release of a movie, I'm so touched that anybody shows up. Like anybody. Like, I thought we were going to come to a room. I thought it was going to be more panelists than audience members. Like, I was sure of it. So this is actually very reassuring.
I want to give Laura a chance to say anything on this topic. If you want, you don't have to, but and then we'll.
My distributor is also the financier of the film. So during the edit and to really like finalize the film, they really try to change some very important point of view, and I fought against them, and I understood that they wanted. They said, it's not a perfect movie, and I was like, but it will never be a perfect movie. What do you want to do? What do you expect? A movie is not made to be perfect. I mean, I don't know any perfect movie, and I don't really, if they exist, I don't know if I will like them. So and I understood it was so dangerous. And in their mind, their perspective was like they want to target as much as people as possible to do like their perfect, completely unreal movie, and so they were very reluctant. Then I think they were completely hesitant with the film and were not really trusting in it anymore. And then we had a good response at Sundance, and then the trust. And then now they're super happy. Oh, that's a good movie. And I was like, yes. I mean, thanks. It's been 1 year that I'm trying to. So anyway, I think that's yeah. It's. We'll see now. The film is getting released in 1 week, so we'll see who shows up. You know, I hope you'll come. You know, please come. It's next week.
No, I honestly have no idea. I don't know. I know that all I learned from the last experience was that I needed to do the opposite of what I did, but that's how things are made, right? Like, so every time you make a project, you do something in reaction to the previous project. So if you do something very intimate, then sometimes you feel like I want to do something that has a much grander scale, etc. I think that the thing is that as much of a pain in the ass as it is to shoot in New York, shooting in New York is a privilege. It is a cinematic, beautiful, extraordinary city, and I really tried to milk it for all it was worth. But it was, and New York was like kind of a character in the film, and so I didn't really have an option. So I think that if you don't have an option, you just deal with it, and you just deal with it.
In France or wherever, I don't know, because I shot mostly abroad, and the casting mostly, I did it by myself because I need to find. I'm obsessed by reality and being real. And so Liberia, for example, I had to find former child soldiers. So I spent like 2 years in this country, seeing like all the guys. In a period before then, it's only like gang members, former prisoners, to get this sense of authenticity. And I can't imagine shooting this film. For example, Liberia, I was supposed to shoot, they asked me to shoot in Senegal, and I say I can't because Senegal, there is no war in Senegal, and why I shouldn't shoot in Liberia. So it was kind of difficult because you can't. It was the first film ever shot in this country. You don't have insurance covering the film, so it's a pain in the ass. But I said, yeah, but the story is about child soldiers, so what can I do in Senegal? And I'm doing a program always with actors, which is art therapy. So I'm working with these kids, and even if you do the opposite, if you have a Senegalese kid, you know, acting as a child soldier, is even worse. As the program, you know, art therapy with child soldiers playing their own kind of trauma and releasing the trauma as they act, because they can control what they're doing. So I'm always like, it was the same program in Thailand, and I did the same workshop in prison in Guatemala with gang members and stuff. So I need to shoot in the country where the story happened, with the people who know about the story, who have this kind of experience. And I had, for example, a project I was supposed to, they asked me to do the capture of Saddam Hussein, like a few years ago, a film in Iraq, you know, and they found Saddam, you know, in his hole and stuff. So I said, wow, great, yeah, it's interesting. So I went to Iraq, I did all my researches. The production company said, there is no way you're going to shoot in Iraq. I said, let's see, first, you know, I need for my researches. So I spent time, I went there. And I was in Tikrit, where the Saddam hometown, you know, and I was like, I found a way to sleep almost in his bed. So I said, it's perfect, I'm where the story happened. And then I was figuring, I said, but the problem is the guy from Tikrit, if I do the casting in Baghdad, they're quite different, so I need to do the whole casting in Tikrit. And then, so I was struggling with all these kind of ideas and shooting some in Jordan as well for security reasons. It was a film with Robert Pattinson. Pattinson said, yeah, I want to come in Iraq, you know, in Tikrit. I said, yeah, it's fine. You know, we are like in Saddam Hussein palaces. So I had the helicopter. I talked to the Minister of Defense. Everything is set up. You know, we're going to shoot like 1 or 2 weeks in Saddam Palace, and then we're going to shoot the rest in Jordan. And then the production company said, oh, you can't. You know, you have to shoot in New Mexico. I said, I mean, it was far away from how I was expecting. I said, and the cast, you know, because shooting in a different country, why not? But the cast, the people, the Iraqi people. So they said, I don't know, you can find actors who looks like Iraqi. I said, yeah. And they mentioned the film, the Danny Boyd film. And they said, have you seen this film in India? I said, yeah, what do you mean? I mean, the main actor maybe could be great. I said, but does he speak Arabic? I said, no, he's Indian. I said, so what's the point, you know? I said, yeah, there's a name, you know, we can find. Where's Mana? I said, I mean, okay, I quit the film. So I think shooting abroad and shooting in a country, it's also shooting with the people of the country. And if you tell a story about Thai people, in this case, or child soldiers or whatever, for me it's a mark of respect, you know, to shoot in this country, not trying to recreate something somewhere else. I mean, sometimes you have to security reason, but it's more like working with the people that you tell the story about, if it's not your own, in a way, I mean, to portray this. Don't know if it's answer to the question, but I kind of like, you know, to immerse the actor, you know, in the real situation. So I had to prep. That's why I spent like almost 2 years in this country, you know, to find the prison. And they asked me first, you know, the first thing was, you can shoot in studio with actors and stuff. I said, I can't, you know, I need to find the real prison. And I need to find the actors. So as soon as you set up everything, the reality of the story, then Joe came and he was facing like 40 like gang members full of tattoos, not speaking a word of English. So he had to immerse himself and try to feel the same as Billy Moore, the real guy, you know, when he ended up in prison. And in the script, you know, it was full of dialogues and stuff, but those guys, they don't speak English. So I said, I need to find a way to change the script to be also more close from the reality. So I say, okay, let's do the first test with Joe. It's gonna be to see if we can tell a story to each other. So I called Joe and with the gang members, and I say, okay, you need to tell a story to each other, and you need to use whatever word you know in Thai, or whatever word you know in English, or you are a gesture, you know, and find a way with your body to tell a story. And I thought it was working, so I said, okay, it's gonna be we're gonna do like this. And when he ended up in this prison, yeah, everything was real, kind of, you know. So Joe, we shot only like long shots, sometimes 10 minutes and stuff. So you don't have the artifice of the cinema, kind of, you know, you don't have the technique, you don't have everything to be like, okay, I'm in my comfort zone, you know, suddenly you are like in a cell with 40 people and one guy with a camera trying to follow what's going on, and some improvisation, but we are working before, in advance, you know, to prep and to rehearse every scene. So I like to immerse the audience in a film, but I like also to immerse the actors, you know, trying to feel it's real and they are not in a movie. So for Joe, it was not easy every day. You know, he had like kind of tough physically, but he's still young and still alive.
Did others find, I would love to know how you relate to this question as it relates to your own characters, your own actors, your own stories, and that adaptation process.
Actually, that's very interesting because I could have never spent 2 years in Kurdistan or whatever. Like, I guess like the work process is very personal, and you do what you need to do for yourself to digest and understand the story and convey it to the people. And I didn't have time. For example, that I'm very impressed that you spent 2 years. I spent 10 days in Kurdistan, and then what I did afterwards was just try to surround myself with people who knew everything in terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of the gestures that you have when you're a guerrilla fighter, because you're not a soldier, you're not an army trained soldier, so you don't hold your gun the same way, you don't run the same way, you don't have the same reflexes. And the only thing that is that I was offered as well to shoot in a very different country in Morocco for Kurdish people, and I was like, what? You know, like they don't look anything like Kurdish people. They don't speak Kurdish, they speak Arabic. And, you know, you find yourself trying to explain very basic stuff to people, that it can't happen like that. So Georgia, we got lucky with Georgia because it was a country that was peaceful, but that had known war. So you had landscapes that, showed the trace of that. And you had a Kurdish community that, we bonded with. We spent months knocking on the doors because obviously, filmmaking is not even in their world. It's very, very different from France. And we sort of bonded on a human level. I didn't speak the same language as the girls. They spoke Russian and Georgian. But I realized that even though I'm trilingual, for example, I realized that you can say so much without speaking the same language. And it's actually fascinating because you have to find tricks and other things that are going to communicate when you need to communicate. But yeah, that's the difference of approach is interesting. And when they offered us to shoot in Iraq, the bottom line was that the second we set foot there, Turkey started bombarding. We could not go to that place because there was a gas mustard attack that, not killed, but 300 people were hurt. And you literally cannot tell a whole production crew that they might just get all killed if they make the movie. So I wanted a place that still felt the depth of war, but at the same time was safe enough for us to work, actually.
I'm going to make Jean-Stéphane my production manager on the next one. He's going to be like, listen, I've been in touch with the Minister of Defense, and don't worry about your client. We'll get him in and out real safe and sound. We have a helicopter. It's very.
If you shoot in Afghanistan or somewhere else, if you shoot in Hungary,
it's impressive. You guys are impressive. Seriously, I'm impressed. I think I've spoken enough. I don't think anyone needs to hear from me about anything anymore.
The last question I want to ask each of you as we wrap up, we're almost out of time, is most of you have hinted at next projects. So maybe just share with us what you're working on creatively right now, whether it's a new project or whether you're exploring something that you want to share. We'd love to hear it.
I don't know, I'm preparing a film in New York, but I moved to New York 10 years ago, so I can say I spent 10 years to prep the film. But it's about paramedic 911. So I'm spending all my nights, you know, following ambulance, which I enjoy since for 5 months, you know. I'm learning about the paramedic, but it's also a way to immerse myself, you know, in this world, trying to recreate, because I'm not a paramedic, you know, so I have to learn everything, and you face a lot of cases, and you go. I'm doing my location scout at the same time, being in an ambulance, you know, and the cast, so I can say, oh yeah, this patient is great, you know, it would be in a film, or this apartment is interesting. So yeah, it's a way to immerse yourself in your story and live, you know, what your characters are living. So that's the project right now. We are supposed to shoot June.
And you probably never know from night to night what part of the city you're going to see.
No, I mean, I think I'm going to shoot more like, because I'm working with different hospitals, but I'm going to shoot probably more like Bed-Stuy and Bushwick and East New York. Okay. And
very good.
Trying to...
Thank you.
Well, when I was writing Girls of the Sun, I guess, you know, I guess the writing was almost the hardest part, because I had to rehash all those traumatic stories that those women told me, and I started developing skin rashes, and I started, you know, not being able to sleep, and I just realized how much you cannot dissociate your body from your mind when you make a movie. It really affects you physically, whether you like it or not. And you know, all of us know how you stop sleeping on a shoot because you're so high on adrenaline, and at the end of the shoot you're like, you have a depression because you were high on adrenaline and you don't have adrenaline anymore. So I was like, okay, I need to take care of myself for my next project, because otherwise I just won't be able to make another project. And I was offered a story about grief, but in a very tender, lovely way, between New York and the UK. And I was writing it as I was working on the movie, and it was my safe place that made me feel happy. And now I just finished the script, and hopefully, you know, the next step is prep, etc.
I'm casting a film called The Brutalist right now, which my wife and I wrote together. That's not going to be very easy to make, but is a sort of chronicle of the experiences of a Hungarian Jewish architect who emigrates to Philadelphia after the war, and who's trying to get his wife over to the United States because she's stuck in a displaced persons camp on the Austrian border. And it's about his relationship with his financier, and it's loosely based on some personal experiences, and to bring it all the way back around to the veil that that we use to talk about personal experiences. This one is quite direct.
After exploring like a male physical prison, the next project that I'm working on with Brady's wife, Mona Fasvold, explore the female psychological prison. So keeping the obsession of imprisonment, but with a mother and 3 daughters, and she doesn't want the daughters to leave the house. So this is a huis clos.
I really want to thank for their time and generosity and information and context each of our panelists. Thank you, Jean-Stéphane. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Brady.
Thank you,
Laure.
Eugene.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.